On your behalf, let me first of all acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and that tribute has a particular pertinence tonight because we are talking about the predicament of another Indigenous people. We're here to talk about the Russell Tribunal with particular reference to the predicament of the people of Palestine. I'm going to make a few introductory remarks about the Russell Tribunal because Peter, being a sort of philosopher friend of Bertrand Russell's, is going to elaborate on that. Bertrand Russell, you remember, the great philosopher, mathematician, novelist, founder of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, together with Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre in 1966, said that the world needed a people's jurisdiction to investigate the crimes of America in the Vietnam War. To say we the people in the tradition of the United Nations, no respect to the uncritical respect to the sovereignty of nations, and the idea was to investigate where, in this case, the United States had violated all sorts of aspects of international law, with regard to the use of weapons that were forbidden, with regard to the use of torture as a weapon of war, with regard to the production of prisoner of war camps, and so on. And subsequently, Peter will elaborate on that, subsequently the idea of the Russell Tribunal, and in a sense, you, the people of politics and the pub, are part of that tribunal. My responsibility, and Peter's and Mohammed Al-Kurd's, is to present some of the evidence to you. That idea of the tribunal was then transferred to New York about 3 years ago to investigate the violations of international law by the government of Israel regarding the use of prohibited weapons, regarding the demolition of people's homes, the possession of the transfer of people into land occupied, which, as you know, is against international law. I'm not going to say any more about the Russell Tribunal, except to say that it's an amazingly important tradition. You remember also that Russell said the only problem with war is not who is right, but who is left. Yes. Which, if only in our current fascination with sending more troops to Iraq, people could be reminded of that. The wonderful Noam Chomsky doesn't usually subscribe to heroes or mentors. But if you go to his office in MIT in Boston, you will see a life-size cut-out figure of Lord Bertrand Russell. And it's there because Russell said he had 3 passions in his life, and this is part of the tradition of what we're talking about tonight. It refers to all of us. The need for love, the search for knowledge, and the pity for the appalling suffering of humankind. Those 3 passions are what drove him, and it's on that basis, with those thoughts in mind, that we're going to talk a bit about what's happened to the people of Palestine. We can start with perhaps with Operation Cast Lead, you remember? 2008, 2009, in which only 1,400 non-combatant Palestinians lost their lives in that particular so-called war. And Peter and I were with Australian diplomats in Jerusalem a few years ago, and when they kept on talking about the war, and I said, that wasn't a war, that was just an organised slaughter. Please be careful about the language. I know in the language of diplomacy, you have to be polite, and you have to use euphemisms that confuse, but that was an organised slaughter. The kill ratio was 100 to 1. How is that justified? Well, that 100 to 1 ratio, of course, has been beaten many times over in the subsequent Operation Protective Edge, in which over 2,000 Palestinians disproportionate numbers of women and children were killed. And when you look at the figures for the non-combatants on both sides, you see that the kill ratio there was 600 to 1. 600 Palestinians, women and children, other civilians killed for every one Israeli civilian. But somehow that is justified. I want to speak a little bit about Gaza. I've just about an hour ago had a conversation with Shamik Badra, who is a Gazan student at the University of Sydney, the first student, can you imagine this, ever from Gaza to study at that august institution. And what do we read about Gaza? That 5 years ago, 80,000 people were on food handouts from United Nations Refugee Works Association, UNRWA. Today, that number has been multiplied by 10. There are 800,000 people totally dependent. Children are dying of hypothermia. They're freezing to death. 90% of the water is not, you can't drink it. The generation of power lasts at best for 6 hours a day. We collude with that. In the conference in Cairo a few months ago to raise money to rebuild Gaza, almost all of it to be rebuilt, the amount received now is only 5% of what was promised, because when you begin to unmask the reasons for that, there seems to be an assumption that in a few years' time, even if it was rebuilt, the Israelis would bomb it all flat again with the blind collusion of the United States of America. So there is an obviously cruel and pathetic situation in which we happily collude. We've heard almost nothing about in the mainstream press, a little bit in citizenship journalism, in the social media, about the cruelty that is part of the survival of the people of Palestine. I keep being sent by the people who hate me, from what I would call the Zionist lobby, all sorts of articles saying with pleasure that people are trying to get out of Gaza as quickly as possible. In a way, that's part of the project that started in 1948 to empty that part of the world entirely, to have an ethnic cleansing almost completed. So how do we respond to that? Well, one of the responses, I'm not going to say too much about it, is the important boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which we all need to remind ourselves is based in international law, was crafted by the Palestinians 12 years ago now, in 2005, over 10 years ago, is essentially non-violent, and it refers to the first paragraph in the Charter of the UN that says that all the indigenous people of the world have a right to self-determination. Nothing more than that. And yet you'd think it was the most vile anti-Semitic conspiracy imaginable. It's being increasingly regarded around the world, and particularly across campuses in Europe and even in North America, as unexceptional. The last vote I saw was at the School of African and Oriental Studies in London, when over 2,000 people voted a few days ago about the choice of BDS, whether they would support the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. The vote was 73% in favour. I only wish there was sufficient courage across the campuses of Australia, pusillanimous Australia, do you like that word? It's pusillanimous Australia, to vote in a similar fashion. The other movement, which some people think is only symbolic, but I think it's rather important, in response to the appalling cruelty that I've just identified, concerns the efforts to recognise the Palestinian state. Because historically, it is said you can't be taken seriously unless you are a state. Not in a state of something, but a state. So that your participation in international treaties is legitimised because you are a state. The vote on a Jordanian resolution in the Security Council in December at the end of last year, of course, was vetoed by the Americans, supported by Israel and Australia. And Bob Carr, to his credit, wrote in the Guardian newspaper that apparently the people of Australia live quite happily with the humiliation of the people of Palestine and the misery, that we are quite happy in prosperous suburbia, despite the intergenerational nonsense report that came out today. Perhaps that's a subject for politics in the pub later. But despite our comforts, we appear to be, at least the government, I'm being unfair to the Australian public, because the polls seem to suggest that we are increasingly in favour of a Palestinian state. I want to talk about the Palestinian state only in the next few minutes, and then I'll finish, in terms of the hypocrisy of the international community as a feature of governments' foreign policies. I want to talk about the proud expressions of hypocrisy. The government of the United States says that it is a proud supporter of international law, but it has always used its veto against any resolution that looks as though it might give us a modicum of hope about justice for the Palestinians. The Palestinians were told very many times, look, why don't you become democratic? Why don't you learn about democracy? You can hear that chorus from the moralists in the West. And that happened in particular in 2006, when there was an election in Palestine. I was there. By every international observer said it was the most scrupulously conducted election. Nobody challenged that. And Condoleezza Rice and the Americans poured a fortune into Fatah, which was regarded as a secular organization. And Condoleezza woke up the following morning and Hamas was elected. So given a great respect for democracy, what did America and Israel and the European Union and Australia do? They immediately established the siege of Gaza. Now, there is no example in history where, or in your own families, or in the institutions you work in, where somebody has been driven into a corner, punished, humiliated, and they've eventually put their tail between their legs and come away from that corner to say, I'm enormously grateful for the way you've treated me, I've learned my lesson. But that is the premise on which this siege of Gaza has been maintained. It's cruelly absurd. Another part of the hypocrisy is to say to the Palestinians, you have to learn about human rights. We respect human rights. You people don't respect human rights. And yet over perhaps the most crucial human rights issue for all of us is about access to water. And so we collude with the process by which the Israelis are entitled to 5 times the amount of water as the people of Palestine, if they're lucky to get that. And if you look at the figures with regard to the particular patronage towards the settlements, the ratio is 25-1. And yet you really should learn something about human rights. You should also learn something about how to make peace. But you can only make peace if you become a state. But we'll never recognize you as a state. So there's this enormous hypocrisy, that a sort of absurd kind of Orwellian game playing that goes on. And the last thing you're told is you've got to be tolerant of different religions. You need to be tolerant of different religions. And that's advice coming from a state that is to be monotheistic. It's a Jewish state. So that brings me back really as a kind of finale to the Bertrand Russell idea that the essential premise behind the Russell Tribunal was that you all have a responsibility not to commit the crime of silence. You have a responsibility to break the silence. And I want to finish up with one of my heroes, with regard to this sense of outrage about the cruelty that this tribunal needs to make a judgment about. And it concerns Stefan Hessel, one of the architects of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a Frenchman who died at the age of 95, but who at the age of 93, which is a form of encouragement for all of us, wrote one of the best sellers ever, Time Indignez-vous, Time for Outrage. And he said there were three things in his life, and he was a member of the French resistance. He was sentenced to death in Buchenwald. This is a kind of great romantic story in some ways. He said there were three reasons for his outrage. The first was the trivial attitude that people had towards the precious environment. This is almost a preface to the environmental movement. The second reason for outrage was the absurd faith that people had in laissez-faire economics. The sort of blind notion that merchant bankers had discovered the formula by which you should all live. But he said as a Jew, he reserved his greatest sense of outrage for the way the Israeli government had treated the people of Israel. And that's a cue for Mohammed El-Kurd by means of a poem about what it's like to live in East Jerusalem at this moment. There's an interview first with Cathy, who interviewed him, and who spent, as I say, 4 or 5 months in East Jerusalem, where the conditions are absolutely appalling. The violence towards the citizens of East Jerusalem has made it a very dangerous place. And the wonderful Palestinian lawyer Diana Boutou said, I'm fed up with hearing that Israelis are the people who respect life, but we, the Palestinians, only respect martyrdom. And that's her comment about what is happening in East Jerusalem.
My name is Mohammed El-Kurd. I'm 16 years old and I live in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem.
And can you tell me about this neighborhood? How has it changed in the time that you've grown up?
This neighborhood was a project built by the UNRWA and the Jordanian government after the Nakba. They randomly picked 28 families' names to establish houses for them, and they built the houses, and we were one of the 28 families. And however, the UNRWA did not sign the papers that say that we own this land, we own the houses. We just had the documents without them signing it. And then it was pretty quiet, as my grandmother says. It was fine until Israel occupied East Jerusalem and the West Bank in 1967, and they started claiming this land, and they started claiming these houses. So yeah, and we've been battling in courts with them since the 70s, and in 2008 one house, which is Kamel Kurd's house, was taken away, and she was thrown out of her house. And then 2 other houses, which are Ghawi family and Hanoun family, were thrown out of their houses. And when we talk about Ghawi and Hanoun, each one of these has 6 or 7 families inside the clan of the house. So they were all thrown in the street, and they lived in a tent for about 6 months or 7 months. And afterwards, in December 2009, our house, one part of my house, was taken. Just only one part was taken, and that's it.
When you say that was taken, it was the front part of your house is now
Yes.
occupied by settlers who come, every few weeks and change?
Yes, our house is occupied by settlers who only the one part of our house, the front part, they come and they change every few weeks or every few months, and they are very, rude and ignorant and disgusting and inhuman and intolerating.
And so you have to pass them all the time. I understand they have dogs as well.
Yeah, when we go through the house, we have to pass and see them. And yes, they have dogs. They have 2 dogs, and both of the dogs are very scary. But it's not only about them having dogs or about them being violent. I mean, the whole thing of seeing people who don't belong in your house, a house that you were forbidden to live in, and a right taken away, you see them just enjoying it with no feeling of guilt. And it's disgusting to see them every day, because I know it's my house. And when you talk about other families like Ghawi and Hanoun, it's their houses as well. So it's really, even if they were not violent, even if they were nice settlers. It would be just unacceptable for people to just go in and evacuate people. It's not. It's more than the moral thing that the settlers don't have. It's the whole thing of humanity, or just knowing the right from wrong. Even though I believe they know it's wrong, they just do it anyway.
How many settlers are living in your street now?
I don't know the amount, but there are like about 6 families of settlers. In our house, there's a group of settlers, so not less than 50, but not more than 100, I think.
And can you tell me personally what impact this has on you as an individual? I understand you're a poet and a writer.
I try to be. Okay, so I believe that resistance has so many forms and stuff. And I think that where I belong is on paper, and I want to give out the message of the whole situation here to the world through my writing and through words. So I think my weapon as an individual in Sheikh Jarrah is my word. So I think so there's like forced resistance, and there's popular resistance, and there's literature to me. And there have been so many Palestinian writers who have impacted and changed a little bit of the mainstream view about Palestine. For example, when we talk about Mahmoud Darwish, he changed the whole, not the whole, but he changed a big piece of the public eye on Palestine. And I think I want to do that too. And I want people to change what they think. I want people to see things for its truth. And I believe that poetry is not a comforting matter. It should not make you feel comfortable. It actually should make you feel sad or uncomfortable, or make you be sad about yourself remaining voiceless, and it should give you shiver, and it should provoke you. So that's what I want to do, and to make people have an urge to make a change.
You've written a poem about Jerusalem.
So many poems.
So many poems. Tell me about how many poems you've written and how long you've been writing.
I have been writing for, let's say in English for 3 or 4 years, but in Arabic I have been writing ever since I was 10 or something. But I think I just write like any other Palestinian person, because I think when you feel powerless, you just go to do something you can do. And I think writing has been that for me. But yeah, I don't think my writing is anywhere near special or whatever. But I try. I breathe in this city, and I pretend that it doesn't hurt me. Jerusalem is home. Even though the city brings me down every single day, Jerusalem is home. Even though it saddens me every single day, Jerusalem is home. Even though that this town makes me wish to die quite frequently, Jerusalem tears me down, scars and bruises, tears and sad smiles. Jerusalem raises me up only so it could knock me down again. Jerusalem is each lie treated like truth, and each truth treated like a lie. Jerusalem is a divine crime scene, a crime committed with the hands of the holy. Jerusalem is the beheading of the Hydra, a lynching of those who speak just. Jerusalem is nothing but their tongues on its soils. If only Jerusalem spoke, I would be thankful. If only Jerusalem said something, I would live to hear it again and again. If only Jerusalem talked, the invisible bruises would finally fade. If only Jerusalem spoke. If only the soil spoke. If only the wrinkles on my grandmother's forehead spoke. If only the walls of the city spoke. If only the lies they made spoke, they'd say the truth. Jerusalem is a woman giving birth to a new life that we might never ever see. Jerusalem is a rebirth to this very life we live. Jerusalem is what we make it. So let it be reborn into truth and beyond. Jerusalem, once again, is home. A home where the windows are shattered open, but still there wouldn't be any air for us to breathe. Jerusalem, once again, is home. A home where you always carry the key with you, but there isn't a door anyway. Jerusalem, once again, is home. A home where the walls have ears and the ears have tongues and the tongue still lies and the lies live on. Jerusalem is home. A home where the life had died giving birth to a new one. Jerusalem is a fortune teller telling us we're going to have a happy life. Little does she know that destiny chose to make us live like refugee pillows. And the anticipation knows no sleep. Jerusalem is hopes aborted, fears fulfilled. Jerusalem is sirens as a lullaby, tear gas as heavy perfume. Jerusalem is truths unspoken, or always spoken but never heard. Jerusalem is a woman holding her stone and throwing it in the sky that they filled with F-16s. Jerusalem is a little girl screaming, "Fuck this war, I'm going to school." Jerusalem is a man, hard-working, and the sweat waters the hope, and the hope feeds the heart faith, and the heart makes us numb, but never too numb. Jerusalem is a boy, seeing it the way it is, the way it was, and the way it should be. Jerusalem is I, and I am Jerusalem, almost collapsing, almost too strong. Jerusalem, once again, is home, a home where the walls have ears, and the ears have tongues, and the tongue still lies, and the lies live, but life ends. That's it.
Fantastic poem.
Thank you.
When did you write that poem?
Like a week ago.